Is a cleaner's son allowed to touch such an expensive violin? Valencia's mocking voice echoed through the silent classroom as she thrust the instrument into Marcos's hands. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from restraining the truth burning inside him. What if your greatest talent became the weapon others used to humiliate you? What if the very thing they mocked you for was the key to your redemption? Watch as a teacher's cruel attempt to publicly shame a black student backfires in the most spectacular way. Who was this boy standing before his classmates, and what hidden legacy flowed through his veins? Watch the full story to discover how one brave teacher's hidden talents changed everything for a school trapped in outdated traditions. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The whispers started the moment Marcos Johnson entered the classroom. At 16, his tall frame and dark skin stood out among the predominantly white faces of Westridge Academy's advanced music class. He clutched his backpack straps tightly, his eyes scanning the room for an empty spot. "You must be Mr. Johnson," Ms. Valencia Pierce said, her voice carrying a hint of disdain as she looked up from her attendance sheet. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her designer outfit clearly meant to impress. "You're late on your first day." "Sorry, ma'am," Marcos replied softly. "The office took longer than expected with my transfer paperwork." Valencia's eyes narrowed as she assessed him from head to toe. His worn jeans and simple t-shirt were a stark contrast to the other students' expensive attire. "Well, find a seat quickly. We don't waste time in my class." Marcos moved toward an empty desk but remained standing beside it. The pain in his lower back flared at the thought of sitting. "Is there a problem, Mr. Johnson?" Valencia asked sharply, noticing his hesitation. "I prefer to stand, if that's all right," Marcos answered, his voice steady despite the discomfort. A few snickers echoed from the back of the room. Blake Thompson, son of a record producer, leaned over to whisper something to his friends that made them burst into poorly concealed laughter. "This isn't a standing concert, Mr. Johnson. In my classroom, we follow proper etiquette." "I have a back injury, Ms. Pierce," Marcos explained, his face betraying no emotion though his hands tightened around the straps of his backpack. Valencia's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Fine. Stand if you must, but don't disrupt my class." She turned to address the room. "Today we continue our exploration of Vivaldi's Four Seasons. As I was saying before we were interrupted, this masterpiece requires precision and cultural understanding that comes from years of proper training." Her eyes flicked deliberately back to Marcos. "Something that cannot be acquired through casual exposure." As Valencia turned to write on the whiteboard, one of her favorite students, Sophia Reynolds, raised her hand. "Ms. Pierce, didn't you mention your family attended the Vienna Philharmonic's performance of Four Seasons last summer?" Valencia beamed. "Yes, indeed. My family has held season tickets for generations. There's simply no substitute for experiencing true artistry firsthand." Marcos remained silent, standing straight despite the pain radiating through his lower back, taking notes diligently as Valencia continued to lecture, carefully avoiding making eye contact with any of the students who occasionally glanced back at him with curiosity or disdain. The first day had begun exactly as he'd feared it might. That evening, Marcos winced as he applied the heating pad to his lower back. Their apartment was small but immaculately clean, the furniture worn but carefully maintained. From the kitchen came the sound of his mother humming softly as she prepared dinner. "How was your first day, Mijo?" Eliza Johnson called out, her voice tired but warm. "Fine, Mama," Marcos replied automatically, not wanting to worry her. Eliza appeared in the doorway, still wearing her maid's uniform, her kind eyes seeing through his brief answer. At 42, years of hard work had lined her face, but couldn't diminish her beauty or warmth. "You're back acting up again?" she asked, concern etching her features. Marcos nodded reluctantly. "Just a little." "That teacher should never have put her hands on you," Eliza said, anger flashing briefly in her usually gentle eyes. "The school should have done something." Marcos remembered that day 3 weeks ago, during his initial school tour. He'd gotten separated from the group and wandered into what turned out to be Ms. Pierce's empty classroom, curious about the instruments. Valencia had stormed in, accused him of trespassing, and when he tried to explain, she'd shoved him hard against a desk edge. The bruising had been severe, but the administration had dismissed it as an unfortunate misunderstanding. "It doesn't matter now, Mama," Marcos said. "I got into the advanced music program anyway." Eliza sat beside him, taking his hand. "Your grandfather would be so proud. He always said music was in your blood." Marcos smiled at the mention of his grandfather, Samuel Johnson, who had taught him to play violin from the age of 4, using an old instrument he'd cherished for decades. "I miss him," Marcos said quietly. "He's watching over you," Eliza assured him. "Now, let me see that back." As she examined the still visible bruising, Eliza's face hardened. "Mrs. Whittington asked if I could work extra hours this weekend. They're having some fancy party." "I'll be fine here, Mama." "You should take the hours," Marcos said, knowing they needed the money for his medication. "Maybe you could bring your violin to school tomorrow?" Eliza suggested. "Playing always makes you feel better." Marcos shook his head quickly. "I don't want anyone there touching Grandpa's violin." What he didn't say was how Valencia Pierce had looked at him, like he didn't belong there, like his presence somehow contaminated her precious classroom. From across the hall, a soft knock came at their door. It was Jamie, their neighbor's son who attended the same school. "Hey, Marcos," he said, lingering awkwardly in the doorway. "Just wanted to see how your first day went." "It was okay," Marcos replied. "I heard you got Pierce for music," Jamie said, grimacing. "She's pretty tough." "I noticed," Marcos said dryly. "Just watch out," Jamie advised. "She has favorites, and she makes life hell for everyone else." After Jamie left, Marcos carefully took out his grandfather's violin from its case. Though the case was worn, the instrument inside was beautiful, lovingly maintained for generations. His fingers moved automatically to tune it, muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice. As pain medication dulled the sharp edges of his back injury, Marcos played softly, letting the music wash over him like a protective shield. Tomorrow would be another day at Westridge Academy, and he would need all his strength to face it. By the third day, Marcos had become the favorite target for Ms. Valencia Pierce's thinly veiled contempt. As students filed into the classroom, her eyes tracked him with particular attention, narrowing when she noticed he was still standing rather than sitting. "Mr. Johnson," she called out as the bell rang. "I've been patient with your standing situation, but it's becoming disruptive. Perhaps you should visit the nurse if your alleged injury is still troubling you." The emphasis she placed on alleged sent a ripple of snickers through the classroom. Blake Thompson and his circle of friends exchanged amused glances. "My doctor recommended standing until it fully heals," Marcos replied evenly. "How convenient," Valencia remarked, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Well, since you're already standing, perhaps you can distribute these score sheets." She thrust a stack of papers into his hands, deliberately letting half of them slip to the floor. More laughter erupted as Marcos carefully bent to gather them, his face a mask despite the pain that shot through his back. "Careful with those," Valencia said with mock concern. "Unlike what you might be accustomed to at home, these scores are actually valuable." The reference to his economic status wasn't lost on anyone. Heat climbed up Marcos's neck as he quietly handed out the papers, ignoring the smirks and whispers. "Did your mom clean my house last week?" Madison Whitaker stage whispered as he passed her desk. "She does such a good job with our bathrooms." Marcos kept his eyes forward, his jaw tight. It wasn't the first time he'd heard such comments. His mother cleaned houses for several of the wealthy families whose children attended Westridge Academy. When he returned to his spot, Valencia was discussing the upcoming winter showcase. "This is our department's most prestigious event," she explained. "Only our most accomplished musicians will be selected to perform. It's attended by conservatory scouts, donors, and people of significant cultural influence." Her gaze swept over the classroom, deliberately skipping over Marcos. "Ms. Pierce," called out one of the students, a girl named Rachel who'd been one of the few to offer Marcos a smile on his first day. "Will there be auditions for the showcase?" "Technically yes," Valencia replied. "But I already have a good sense of who possesses the necessary skill and appropriate presentation for such an event." Throughout the rest of the class, Valencia called on every student except Marcos, despite his raised hand during discussions of Baroque musical techniques, a subject his grandfather had taught him extensively. When he finally spoke up without being called on, offering a nuanced comment about Bach's partitas, Valencia cut him off. "While I appreciate your enthusiasm, Mr. Johnson, perhaps you should master basic classroom etiquette before attempting to discuss advanced musical concepts." "But I was just..." "That's enough," Valencia snapped. "See me after class." After the bell rang and the other students filed out, Valencia approached Marcos, her voice lower but no less cutting. "Let me be clear, Mr. Johnson. You are here on a partial scholarship that could easily be withdrawn. This is a prestigious program for serious musicians, not a charity case for the maintenance staff's children." Marcos felt his hands trembling with suppressed anger. "My grandfather was a concert violinist." Valencia's laugh was like ice. "Of course he was. And I suppose he played for royalty too?" "He wasn't allowed to," Marcos replied quietly. "Not in the places he wanted to play." "Listen carefully," Valencia said, ignoring his comment. "Standing out might have gotten you noticed in your previous school, but here, it only highlights how much you don't belong. I suggest you try to blend in, if that's possible." As she turned away dismissively, Marcos caught sight of the violin cases lined up in the storage cabinet. His fingers itched to prove her wrong, to show her exactly what his grandfather had taught him. But the memory of her shoving him against the desk held him back. For now, he would endure. For his mother, for his grandfather's memory, and for himself. But a plan was forming in his mind. There would come a moment when Valencia Pierce would have to acknowledge his talent, whether she wanted to or not. The memory came to Marcos vividly as he lay in bed that night, his small hands positioned carefully on the violin, his grandfather's gentle guidance as they moved through scales together. Samuel Johnson had been a tall man with kind eyes and hands that seemed to speak their own language when they touched the strings of his violin. "Music is our legacy, Marcos," his grandfather would say. "When nothing else was allowed to us, we still had our music." In those moments, sitting on the worn carpet of their old apartment in Chicago, 5-year-old Marcos would listen in wonder as his grandfather recounted stories of his youth. Of being the most talented student in his school but watching as less skilled white musicians were selected for opportunities that should have been his. "Your great-grandfather played too," Samuel would tell him. "On plantations where our people weren't even considered human, he created beauty that made even the cruelest hearts pause. That's power, Marcos." Samuel had been recognized as a prodigy in the 1960s, but doors remained closed to him because of his race. He'd managed to join a small regional orchestra, but his dreams of playing with the nation's premier symphonies remained unrealized. Instead, he taught music in community centers and gave private lessons, passing his gift and his passion to generations of students, none more beloved than his grandson. "Feel the music here," Samuel would say, placing his hand over Marcos's heart. "Play from this place, and no one can deny your voice." After school each day, young Marcos would rush home for his lesson, his mother often working double shifts to keep food on their table. Even after his grandfather's hands began to tremble with Parkinson's disease, his instruction remained precise, his ear for pitch perfect. When Samuel passed away 3 years ago, he left Marcos his violin, an instrument that had been in their family for generations. It wasn't a Stradivarius or a Guarneri, but it had been lovingly maintained, its tone rich and resonant from decades of playing. "This violin has known more joy and pain than most humans," Samuel had told Marcos. "Treat it with respect, and it will never let you down." After his grandfather's death, Marcos practiced with even greater dedication, often playing late into the night with a mute on his violin so as not to disturb neighbors in their thin-walled apartment building. When his mother would return from long days of cleaning other people's homes, he would play for her, watching the tension ease from her shoulders as the music filled their small living room. When they'd moved to this new city for his mother's job opportunity, Marcos had researched Westridge Academy's music program extensively. With his grades and a recording of his playing, he'd secured a partial scholarship. What the school didn't know was that Marcos had turned down a full scholarship to a performing arts school in Chicago to stay with his mother, who needed the higher wages this affluent suburb offered. "You should have gone to that art school," his mother had said more than once. "You shouldn't have given that up for me." "We stay together," Marcos would always reply, the same words she had said to him countless times throughout his childhood when things got tough. Now, staring at the ceiling of his new bedroom, Marcos replayed Valencia Pierce's dismissive words in his mind. He reached for his grandfather's violin, drawing it close like a talisman. "I won't let them take this from us, Grandpa," he whispered into the darkness. "I won't let them make me ashamed of who I am or where I come from." His back throbbed dully as he carefully positioned himself to play, but he pushed through the discomfort. The notes of Vivaldi's Winter filled the small room, the very piece Valencia had been discussing in class. His fingers moved with precision born of thousands of hours of practice, infusing the technically challenging passages with emotion that transformed mere notes into storytelling. This was his heritage, his voice. And soon, they would all hear it. A week into the term, Valencia announced the class would begin preparations for a preliminary showcase, a prelude to the winter event that would help her determine which students deserved featured spots in the main performance. "This will be your opportunity to demonstrate your technical proficiency and artistic interpretation," she explained, her gaze sweeping across the room before pointedly skipping over Marcos. "I've assigned pieces that should challenge each of you appropriately." She began distributing sheet music, calling students forward one by one. For Blake Thompson, she had selected a showy Paganini caprice. For Sophia Reynolds, a delicate Mozart sonata. Each selection seemed carefully tailored to showcase the students' strengths. When she had handed assignments to everyone else in the class, Marcos remained empty-handed. "Miss Pierce," he said quietly. "You didn't give me a piece." Valencia turned, her expression one of exaggerated surprise. "Oh. I suppose I didn't." She made a show of looking through her folders. "I'm afraid I didn't prepare anything for you, Mr. Johnson. Perhaps you could observe this time. It would be educational for you to see how properly trained musicians approach these works." The humiliation burned through Marcos like acid. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. Blake and his friends exchanged smirks. "I can play," Marcos said, his voice low but steady. "I've been studying violin since I was 4. Valencia's laugh was light and dismissive. "How charming. Did your mother save up for lessons between cleaning houses? Or perhaps you watched YouTube tutorials?" The classroom went silent. Even Blake stopped smiling, the comment too nakedly cruel to be amusing. "My grandfather taught me," Marcos replied, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "He was first chair violin for the South Side Symphony Orchestra in Chicago." "Ah yes, your concert violinist grandfather," Valencia said with mock seriousness. "Well, Mr. Johnson, I'm sure he was very accomplished in his community setting. But this showcase requires classical training of the highest caliber." She turned away, effectively dismissing him. "Now, as I was saying about the showcase requirements." Marcos stood frozen, the pain in his back nothing compared to the burning in his chest. For the rest of the class, he said nothing, taking mechanical notes while Valencia studiously ignored his existence. When the bell rang, he was the first to leave, moving swiftly despite his injury, needing to escape before his emotions betrayed him. He made it as far as the empty stairwell before stopping, leaning against the wall and breathing deeply to regain his composure. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, "There will always be people who want to diminish you. Don't give them the satisfaction of breaking your spirit." "Everything okay?" Marcos turned to see Rachel, the girl who had smiled at him on his first day. "Fine," he said automatically. Rachel hesitated. "What Ms. Pierce said wasn't right. Everyone knows it." But no one said anything, Marcos pointed out. I should have, Rachel admitted, looking down. My parents are on the school board, and I just froze. Marcos nodded, understanding her unspoken explanation. Valencia Pierce had power at Westridge Academy, power that could affect grades, college recommendations, and performance opportunities. It's okay, he said. It's not your fight. It shouldn't be anyone's fight, Rachel replied. Not in 2025. As Rachel walked away, Marcos made a decision. He had tried to keep his head down, to endure quietly as his mother had always advised. But some things shouldn't be endured. Some battles needed to be fought. Tomorrow, he would bring his grandfather's violin to school. The classroom buzzed with nervous energy the next morning. Students clustered in small groups, practicing fragments of their assigned showcase pieces. Valencia moved between them, offering praise to her favorites and terse criticism to others. Marcos stood in his usual spot, but today the worn case containing his grandfather's violin rested against the wall beside him. His heart pounded as he waited, hand occasionally brushing the case for reassurance. Valencia didn't notice the violin case until halfway through the class, when she called students up individually to demonstrate their progress. Her eyes narrowed when they fell on the battered leather case. Mr. Johnson, she said, her voice carrying over the diminishing conversations. What is that? My violin, Marcos answered simply. A patronizing smile spread across Valencia's face. How ambitious of you. But as I explained yesterday, you won't be participating in the showcase demonstrations. I'd like to play anyway, Marcos said, his voice steadier than he felt. For the class. The room went completely silent. No one had ever directly challenged Valencia before. This is not an open mic night, Mr. Johnson, Valencia said coldly. This is a structured curriculum for serious musicians. Principal Thompson chose that moment to open the classroom door, poking his head in for what was clearly a routine observation. Valencia's demeanor instantly changed, her smile becoming warm and professional. Principal Thompson, what perfect timing. We're just about to hear some of our students demonstrate their showcase pieces. Marcos saw his opportunity. Before Valencia could stop him, he picked up his violin case and stepped forward. I was just about to play, sir, he said to the principal. Valencia's face tightened, but with the principal watching, she couldn't openly refuse without appearing unprofessional. Instead, she seized what she thought was an opportunity to publicly put Marcos in his place. Indeed, she said smoothly. Mr. Johnson insists he can play, despite having no formal training in our program. Perhaps it would be educational for everyone to hear the difference. She gestured grandly toward the front of the classroom. Please, Mr. Johnson. Show us what you can do. Whispers rippled through the class as Marcos moved to the center of the room. He could feel everyone watching as he carefully opened the case and removed his grandfather's violin. A few students snickered at the instrument's obvious age, so different from their own expensive, shiny instruments. Valencia's smile grew more pronounced as she spotted the worn violin. What a unique instrument. Is it actually playable? It's been in my family for generations, Marcos replied, running his fingers gently over the polished wood. How quaint, Valencia said with exaggerated interest. And what will you be playing for us today? Twinkle, twinkle little star, perhaps. More laughter from Blake's corner of the room. Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto in D major, Marcos answered quietly. The first movement. Valencia's smile faltered momentarily, then returned with added condescension. One of the most technically challenging pieces in the repertoire. Ambitious indeed. She turned to address the class and Principal Thompson. Let's all listen carefully. This should be instructive. The expression on her face made her expectations clear. She anticipated a disaster, a public humiliation that would put Marcos in his place once and for all. She even pulled out her phone, and Marcos realized with a sinking feeling that she intended to record his failure. Blake leaned forward eagerly. This should be good, he stage whispered to Sophia. Principal Thompson settled into a chair near the door, his expression neutral but attentive. Marcos took a deep breath, positioning the violin under his chin. The familiar weight of it centered him, connected him to his grandfather and all the generations of musicians in his family who had faced barriers and prejudice yet continued to create beauty. He raised the bow, saw Valencia's smirk widen in anticipation of his failure, and began to play. The first notes soared through the classroom with a purity that instantly silenced every whisper. Marcos's bow moved across the strings with assured precision, his fingers finding each note perfectly as the challenging opening passage of Tchaikovsky's concerto filled the room. Valencia's smirk froze on her face, her eyes widening in disbelief as Marcos navigated the technically demanding runs with what appeared to be effortless grace. His eyes had closed, his expression transformed by complete immersion in the music. Principal Thompson sat forward in his chair, clearly taken aback by the unexpected virtuosity coming from a student Valencia had been dismissing. As Marcos reached the main theme, his body swayed slightly with the music, each phrase breathed into life with a maturity of interpretation that belied his 16 years. The violin sang under his fingers, its aged wood producing a warm, rich tone that modern instruments often couldn't match. The classroom remained absolutely silent except for the concerto. Even Blake and his friends sat stunned, all traces of mockery gone from their expressions, replaced by grudging amazement. Two music teachers from adjacent classrooms appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound. They exchanged glances of surprise, then remained to listen, clearly impressed by what they were hearing. Valencia's phone had lowered to her side, still recording but forgotten in her shock. Her carefully constructed narrative about Marcos, the undeserving scholarship student with no real talent, was disintegrating with every note he played. As the piece progressed to its more emotional middle section, Marcos infused the melody with such feeling that several students appeared visibly moved. This wasn't just technical proficiency, this was artistry of the highest caliber, the kind that couldn't be taught but only nurtured. Rachel caught his eye briefly and smiled, a gesture of genuine admiration. Across the room, Sophia Reynolds, Valencia's star pupil, was watching Marcos with an expression that mixed awe with something like envy. For 6 magnificent minutes, Marcos disappeared into the music, channeling all the pain and humiliation of the past weeks into his playing. His back injury seemed forgotten as he moved with the phrases, his grandfather's teachings evident in every nuance of his interpretation. When he finally lowered the bow after completing the movement, the silence that followed seemed to vibrate with leftover energy from his performance. For several seconds, no one moved or spoke. Then Principal Thompson stood and began to applaud, breaking the spell. The classroom erupted in applause, with several students rising to their feet. The two music teachers in the doorway joined in enthusiastically, exchanging comments Marcos couldn't hear over the applause. Only Valencia remained frozen, her face a mask of conflicting emotions, disbelief, embarrassment, and what looked unsettlingly like anger. "That was exceptional, Mr. Johnson," Principal Thompson said, approaching Marcos. "Truly remarkable playing." "Thank you, sir," Marcos replied quietly, carefully returning the violin to its case, his hands shaking slightly from the emotional release of the performance. "Where did you study?" asked one of the music teachers who had been listening from the doorway. "My grandfather taught me," Marcos answered. "Samuel Johnson. He played with the South Side Symphony in Chicago." Recognition flickered across the teacher's face. "Samuel Johnson. I heard him play when I was in college. He was magnificent." Valencia finally seemed to recover her composure, stepping forward to reclaim control of her classroom. "Yes, well, this has been an interesting diversion," she said, her voice brittle. "Though I must point out that while Mr. Johnson has clearly practiced this piece extensively, there were technical issues that would need addressing before any formal showcase." The music teacher who had recognized Samuel Johnson's name raised an eyebrow at Valencia's comment but said nothing. "I'd like to hear more of your playing, Marcos," Principal Thompson said, ignoring Valencia's attempt to diminish the performance. "Perhaps you'd consider participating in the winter showcase after all." Before Marcos could answer, Valencia interjected, "That's ultimately my decision as department head, Principal Thompson. We have standards and traditions to maintain." "Of course," Thompson replied smoothly. I'm certain you'll make the appropriate decision after such a demonstration of talent. As the bell rang and students began gathering their things, many cast newfound looks of respect toward Marcos. Blake and his friends avoided eye contact altogether, their earlier mockery now an embarrassment. Rachel approached quickly before leaving. "That was amazing," she said. "Everyone's talking about it already." Valencia overheard and shot Marcos a warning look that carried a clear message: this wasn't over. Marcos carefully shouldered his violin case, his back pain returning now that the adrenaline of performance was fading. But he stood taller than he had in weeks. For the first time since arriving at Westridge Academy, he felt visible, not as the scholarship student to be pitied or mocked, but as a musician worthy of respect. His grandfather's voice seemed to whisper in his ear, "Remember, Marcos. They can try to silence you, but once your music touches their ears, they can never unhear it." By lunchtime, word of Marcos's performance had spread throughout Westridge Academy like wildfire. As he entered the cafeteria, conversations paused and heads turned, the silent scrutiny a stark contrast to his previous invisibility. "There he is," someone whispered loudly as he made his way to an empty table with his lunch tray. "The violin guy." Rachel waved him over to where she sat with a few other students from orchestra. "Marcos. Join us." He hesitated, then navigated toward their table, hyper-aware of the eyes following him. "Is it true you made Ms. Pierce's jaw literally drop?" asked one boy whose name Marcos couldn't remember. "I don't know about that," Marcos replied uncomfortably. "It's true," Rachel confirmed. Her face was priceless. "I wish someone had taken a picture instead of recording the music." "Someone recorded it?" Marcos asked, surprised. "Everyone did," another girl chimed in, holding up her phone. "It's already circulating in all the group chats." Before Marcos could process this information, Sophia Reynolds appeared beside their table, her usual entourage of friends conspicuously absent. "That was Tchaikovsky's Concerto in D major, right?" she asked without preamble. "The piece you played?" Marcos nodded. "I've been working on it for 2 years, Sophia admitted, a reluctant respect in her voice. "Still can't get through the first movement without mistakes. My grandfather made me practice the difficult run separately for months before he let me put it all together," Marcos explained. "Would you?" Sophia hesitated, clearly struggling with her pride. "Would you be willing to show me how you approach the 16th note passage in the development section?" The table went silent, everyone aware of what it cost Sophia, Valencia's star pupil, to ask for help. "Sure," Marcos agreed, surprised but pleased. "Any time." Sophia nodded and walked away, her usual confidence somewhat diminished. "Wow," Rachel whispered. "The Queen Bee herself asking for your help. Things are definitely changing." But not everyone was celebrating Marcos's sudden rise in status. As he left the cafeteria, Blake Thompson and 2 of his friends blocked his path. "Don't let it go to your head, scholarship boy," Blake said, his voice low. "So you can play one piece well. Big deal." "I'm not looking for trouble, Blake," Marcos replied calmly. "Ms. Pierce built this department from nothing," Blake continued, ignoring Marcos's response. "She knows talent. Real talent. Not some party trick you pulled to get attention." "I just played the violin," Marcos said. "That's all." "You made her look bad," one of Blake's friends added. "She won't forget that." As if summoned by her name, Valencia appeared in the hallway, her expression hardening when she spotted Marcos with Blake and his friends. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" she asked, her tone deceptively light. "No problem, Miss Pierce," Blake answered quickly. "Just talking music with Johnson here." Valencia's gaze fixed on Marcos. "Mr. Johnson, a word in my office, please." Blake and his friends exchanged knowing looks as Marcos followed Valencia down the hallway to the small office attached to the music room. Once inside, Valencia closed the door and turned to face him, all pretense of cordiality gone. "That was quite a performance this morning," she said coolly. "Thank you," Marcos replied, wary of her tone. Not the compliment you might think, Valencia clarified. What you did was manipulative and inappropriate. You deliberately set me up to look foolish in front of Principal Thompson. Marcos shook his head. I just wanted to play. To show I belong here. This isn't about belonging, Valencia snapped. This is about respect for authority and proper channels. You should have demonstrated your playing privately, not turned my classroom into a spectacle. You wouldn't have given me the chance privately, Marcos pointed out. You made it clear you thought I had no talent. Valencia's eyes narrowed. One flashy performance doesn't make you a serious musician. And it certainly doesn't erase the problems with your presentation. My presentation? Westridge Academy has certain standards, Valencia said, gesturing vaguely at his clothes. Our showcases attract donors and conservatory scouts. We present a certain image that reflects the school's prestige. The implication was clear. No matter his talent, Valencia still saw him as unsuitable to represent Westridge Academy. My playing speaks for itself, Marcos said quietly. Perhaps, Valencia conceded reluctantly. But I'll be watching you very carefully, Mr. Johnson. Talent isn't everything. Discipline, respect, proper conduct, these matter just as much. Before Marcos could respond, there was a knock at the door. Principal Thompson entered without waiting for an answer. Ah, Miss Pierce, Mr. Johnson. Just the two people I wanted to see. Valencia's demeanor instantly transformed, her smile returning. Principal Thompson, what can I do for you? I've just gotten off the phone with the director of the Regional Youth Symphony, Thompson announced. They're looking for exceptional student performers for their winter concert series, and after what I heard this morning, I took the liberty of mentioning Marcos. Valencia's smile froze. That's wonderful news, but as department head, these recommendations typically come through me. Consider it a special circumstance, Thompson replied smoothly. They'd like to hear Marcos play this Friday. I've already spoken with his mother and arranged for transportation. I see, Valencia said, her voice tight. Well, I'm sure Mr. Johnson appreciates your personal intervention. Indeed I do, Thompson continued, oblivious to Valencia's barely concealed anger. In fact, I think this might be the beginning of quite an opportunity for our school. Marcos, your mother mentioned your grandfather was Samuel Johnson of the South Side Symphony? Yes, sir, Marcos confirmed. Well, it seems we have something of a musical legacy in our midst, Thompson said enthusiastically. Ms. Pierce, I'm sure you'll want to feature Marcos prominently in the winter showcase now. Valencia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course, Principal Thompson. Merit should always be recognized. As Thompson left, Valencia turned back to Marcos, her expression making it clear that while she might have lost this battle, the war was far from over. By lunchtime, word of Marcos's performance had spread throughout Westridge Academy like wildfire. As he entered the cafeteria, conversations paused and heads turned, the silent scrutiny a stark contrast to his previous invisibility. There he is, someone whispered loudly as he made his way to an empty table with his lunch tray. The violin guy. Rachel waved him over to where she sat with a few other students from orchestra. Marcos. Join us. He hesitated, then navigated toward their table, hyper-aware of the eyes following him. Is it true you made Ms. Pierce's jaw literally drop? Asked one boy whose name Marcos couldn't remember. I don't know about that, Marcos replied uncomfortably. It's true, Rachel confirmed. Her face was priceless. I wish someone had taken a picture instead of recording the music. Someone recorded it? Marcos asked, surprised. Everyone did, another girl chimed in, holding up her phone. It's already circulating in all the group chats. Before Marcos could process this information, Sophia Reynolds appeared beside their table, her usual entourage of friends conspicuously absent. That was Tchaikovsky's Concerto in D major, right? She asked without preamble. The piece you played? Marcos nodded. I've been working on it for 2 years, Sophia admitted, a reluctant respect in her voice. Still can't get through the first movement without mistakes. My grandfather made me practice the difficult run separately for months before he let me put it all together, Marcos explained. Would you? Sophia hesitated, clearly struggling with her pride. Would you be willing to show me how you approach the 16th note passage in the development section? The table went silent, everyone aware of what it cost Sophia, Valencia's star pupil, to ask for help. Sure, Marcos agreed, surprised but pleased. Anytime. Sophia nodded and walked away, her usual confidence somewhat diminished. Wow, Rachel whispered. The Queen Bee herself asking for your help. Things are definitely changing. But not everyone was celebrating Marcos's sudden rise in status. As he left the cafeteria, Blake Thompson and two of his friends blocked his path. Don't let it go to your head, scholarship boy, Blake said, his voice low. So you can play one piece well. Big deal. I'm not looking for trouble, Blake, Marcos replied calmly. Ms. Pierce built this department from nothing, Blake continued, ignoring Marcos's response. She knows talent. Real talent. Not some party trick you pulled to get attention. I just played the violin, Marcos said. That's all. You made her look bad, one of Blake's friends added. She won't forget that. As if summoned by her name, Valencia appeared in the hallway, her expression hardening when she spotted Marcos with Blake and his friends. Is there a problem here, gentlemen? She asked, her tone deceptively light. No problem, Miss Pierce, Blake answered quickly. Just talking music with Johnson here. Valencia's gaze fixed on Marcos. Mr. Johnson, a word in my office, please. Blake and his friends exchanged knowing looks as Marcos followed Valencia down the hallway to the small office attached to the music room. Once inside, Valencia closed the door and turned to face him, all pretense of cordiality gone. That was quite a performance this morning, she said coolly. Thank you, Marcos replied, wary of her tone. Not the compliment you might think, Valencia clarified. What you did was manipulative and inappropriate. You deliberately set me up to look foolish in front of Principal Thompson. Marcos shook his head. I just wanted to play. To show I belong here. This isn't about belonging, Valencia snapped. This is about respect for authority and proper channels. You should have demonstrated your playing privately, not turned my classroom into a spectacle. You wouldn't have given me the chance privately, Marcos pointed out. You made it clear you thought I had no talent. Valencia's eyes narrowed. One flashy performance doesn't make you a serious musician. And it certainly doesn't erase the problems with your presentation. My presentation? Westridge Academy has certain standards, Valencia said, gesturing vaguely at his clothes. Our showcases attract donors and conservatory scouts. We present a certain image that reflects the school's prestige. The implication was clear. No matter his talent, Valencia still saw him as unsuitable to represent Westridge Academy. My playing speaks for itself, Marcos said quietly. Perhaps, Valencia conceded reluctantly. But I'll be watching you very carefully, Mr. Johnson. Talent isn't everything. Discipline, respect, proper conduct, these matter just as much. Before Marcos could respond, there was a knock at the door. Principal Thompson entered without waiting for an answer. Ah, Miss Pierce, Mr. Johnson. Just the two people I wanted to see. Valencia's demeanor instantly transformed, her smile returning. Principal Thompson, what can I do for you? I've just gotten off the phone with the director of the Regional Youth Symphony, Thompson announced. They're looking for exceptional student performers for their winter concert series, and after what I heard this morning, I took the liberty of mentioning Marcos. Valencia's smile froze. That's wonderful news, but as department head, these recommendations typically come through me. Consider it a special circumstance, Thompson replied smoothly. They'd like to hear Marcos play this Friday. I've already spoken with his mother and arranged for transportation. I see, Valencia said, her voice tight. Well, I'm sure Mr. Johnson appreciates your personal intervention. Indeed I do, Thompson continued, oblivious to Valencia's barely concealed anger. In fact, I think this might be the beginning of quite an opportunity for our school. Marcos, your mother mentioned your grandfather was Samuel Johnson of the South Side Symphony. Yes, sir, Marcos confirmed. Well, it seems we have something of a musical legacy in our midst, Thompson said enthusiastically. Ms. Pierce, I'm sure you'll want to feature Marcos prominently in the winter showcase now. Valencia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course, Principal Thompson. Merit should always be recognized. As Thompson left, Valencia turned back to Marcos, her expression making it clear that while she might have lost this battle, the war was far from over. Principal Thompson called an emergency meeting the following morning. The conference room felt tense as Marcos and his mother entered, finding several people already seated around the large table. Ms. Daniels was there, along with two school board members Marcos didn't recognize. Valencia sat stiffly at one end, her expression carefully neutral though her hands betrayed her nervousness as they repeatedly smoothed her already immaculate hair. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Principal Thompson began once everyone was seated. I've asked Mr. Winterford from our legal department and Dr. Rawlins, our board diversity chair, to join us given the serious nature of the concerns that have emerged. Valencia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. After yesterday's revelations, I conducted a thorough investigation into our scholarship application process, Thompson continued. What I discovered was deeply troubling. He placed a folder on the table. This contains evidence that Marcos Johnson's music scholarship application was deliberately removed from consideration last spring. Furthermore, there appears to be a pattern of similar actions regarding other minority applicants over the past 5 years. Gasps came from several people around the table. Valencia's face had gone pale. That's a serious accusation, Dr. Rawlins said, her voice measured but concerned. It is, Thompson agreed. And one substantiated by electronic records showing who accessed and modified these files. All eyes turned to Valencia, who finally spoke. This is absurd. I've dedicated my life to musical excellence at this institution. My decisions are based solely on talent and fit for our program. Is that why you physically assaulted a student during a school tour? Eliza asked, her voice containing a quiet fury that made even Thompson look surprised. I did no such thing, Valencia insisted. We have security footage, Thompson countered, pressing a remote control that activated a screen on the wall. From the music room on April 18th of this year. The grainy footage clearly showed a younger Marcos entering the empty music room, respectfully examining instruments without touching them. Valencia's entrance was abrupt, her body language immediately hostile. Though there was no audio, her anger was evident as she confronted Marcos. When he appeared to be explaining himself, the footage showed Valencia grabbing his shoulder and forcefully shoving him backward against a desk edge. Marcos winced watching it, the memory of the pain still fresh. His mother reached for his hand under the table, squeezing it tightly. Ms. Pierce, Mr. Winterford from legal said quietly, this footage alone is grounds for termination and possible criminal charges. Valencia's composure finally cracked. He had no business being in that room unsupervised. Do you have any idea how valuable those instruments are? He wasn't touching anything, Ms. Daniels pointed out. And nothing justifies physically assaulting a student. It wasn't assault, Valencia insisted, though her voice wavered. It was. I was protecting school property. From what? Dr. Rawlins asked sharply. A respectful young man who was simply looking at instruments. Or were you protecting something else entirely? Valencia's silence was damning. I've reviewed Marcos's original application materials, Thompson continued. His playing was exceptional even then. By every metric, he should have received our highest music scholarship. Instead, those materials vanished from our system, and he received only partial academic support. I've also discovered, Ms. Daniels added, that this isn't an isolated incident. At least 7 highly qualified minority students have had their applications mysteriously lost or downgraded over the past 5 years, all during Ms. Pierce's tenure as lead violin instructor. Valencia's face flushed. You can't possibly blame administrative errors on me. I don't control the application system. The system logs every access, Thompson replied calmly. Your credentials were used to access and modify all of these files. This is a witch hunt, Valencia snapped, her careful facade finally crumbling. Westridge Academy has a certain standard, a tradition of excellence that I've maintained. Our donors expect a certain presentation. And black students don't fit that presentation? Dr. Rollins asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I didn't say that, Valencia backpedaled quickly. It's about the overall image, the cohesiveness of our ensembles, the traditions we uphold. Traditions of exclusion, Eliza said firmly. My father-in-law faced the same barriers 60 years ago. He was told orchestras couldn't hire him because audiences weren't ready for a black first-chair violinist. That's completely different, Valencia protested. This isn't about race. It's about standards. Then explain why Marcos's playing surpasses that of your current first chair, Ms. Daniels challenged. Explain why a student with his technical proficiency and musical interpretation was deemed unworthy of our full scholarship program. Valencia had no answer. Let me be clear, Principal Thompson said, addressing everyone. Westridge Academy does not tolerate discrimination in any form. We do not tolerate the physical mistreatment of students. And we certainly do not tolerate the deliberate sabotage of deserving applicants' futures. He turned to Valencia. Ms. Pierce, effective immediately, you are suspended pending a full investigation and disciplinary hearing. You will surrender your keys and access cards before leaving today. You can't do this, Valencia said, her voice rising. I built this department. My connections bring in half the donations for the music program. The winter showcase is 6 weeks away. The showcase will proceed under Ms. Daniels' direction, Thompson replied firmly. As for donations, I believe genuine talent like Marcos's will attract more support than exclusionary practices ever could. Valencia turned to the board members, desperate for support. This boy practiced one flashy piece to make me look bad. He manipulated this entire situation. Dr. Rollins raised an eyebrow. The security footage shows you assaulted him months before he even started attending this school. How exactly did he manipulate that? Marcos, who had been silent throughout most of the meeting, finally spoke. Ms. Pierce, I never wanted to make you look bad. I just wanted to play music, the music my grandfather taught me to love. The music he was often denied the opportunity to share with the world. His quiet dignity in the face of Valencia's accusations seemed to affect everyone in the room. Even Valencia fell silent, something like shame finally crossing her features. Mrs. Johnson, Principal Thompson said, turning to Eliza, on behalf of Westridge Academy, I offer our sincerest apologies for what your son has experienced. We would like to convert his partial scholarship to a full comprehensive scholarship, covering all expenses including private instruction. Eliza nodded, too emotional to speak. And Marcos, Thompson continued, we would be honored if you would consider taking the first chair position in our orchestra for the winter showcase. Your talent deserves to be celebrated, not hidden. As the meeting concluded and Valencia was escorted out by security, Marcos felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. His grandfather had faced the same barriers, the same prejudice, but without the security cameras and electronic logs that had helped reveal Valencia's actions. Progress was slow, generations slow. But it was happening, one confrontation at a time. The weeks leading up to the winter showcase transformed Westridge Academy's music department. With Valencia gone and Ms. Daniels serving as interim director, a new energy permeated the program. Students who had remained silent under Valencia's reign began to find their voices, both musically and personally. For Marcos, the change was profound. His back was finally healing properly, allowing him to sit comfortably during rehearsals where he now occupied the first chair position. More importantly, he no longer felt like an outsider looking in. Other students sought his advice on technique, invited him to their practice sessions, and treated him with the respect his talent deserved. Even Blake Thompson, after initial resistance, had approached Marcos after a particularly challenging rehearsal. "I was wrong about you," Blake had admitted grudgingly. "And probably about a lot of other things too." The apology wasn't particularly eloquent, but Marcos recognized the effort it took. "Music is what matters," he'd replied simply. "Not who plays it." 2 weeks before the showcase, Ms. Daniels called Marcos into her office. To his surprise, his mother was already there, along with Principal Thompson and a well-dressed couple he didn't recognize. "Marcos, these are Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker," Ms. Daniels introduced them. "Madison's parents." Marcos tensed slightly, remembering Madison's cruel comment about his mother cleaning bathrooms. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Marcos," Mr. Whitaker said, extending his hand. "We've heard a great deal about your remarkable talent." "Thank you, sir," Marcos replied cautiously. Mrs. Whitaker stepped forward. "I believe we owe both you and your mother an apology. Madison told us about some very inappropriate comments she made regarding your mother's work." Eliza shifted uncomfortably. "That's not necessary. I am proud of my work." "As you should be," Mrs. Whitaker said sincerely. "You've always been professional and hardworking in our home. But more importantly, you've raised an extraordinary young man." "We're not here just to apologize," Mr. Whitaker added. "We're here because we'd like to help. We've established a scholarship foundation for talented young musicians from diverse backgrounds, and we'd like Marcos to be its first recipient." Marcos looked to his mother in confusion. Principal Thompson smiled. "The Whitakers are offering to cover any expenses not included in your school scholarship, including summer programs, competition fees, and eventually, conservatory applications." "Why?" Marcos asked bluntly. Mr. Whitaker looked embarrassed. "Frankly, what happened to you made us examine our own blind spots. We've been donors to this school for years and never questioned why the showcase performers looked, well, so uniform. We were part of the problem," Mrs. Whitaker admitted. "This is our way of being part of the solution." "We understand if you're hesitant," Mr. Whitaker added. "But this isn't charity. It's an investment in extraordinary talent that deserves support." Eliza's eyes were bright with unshed tears. This would mean Marcos could focus entirely on his music. He wouldn't have to work part-time like we'd planned. "Exactly," Ms. Daniels confirmed. "And there's more good news. The Regional Youth Symphony Director was so impressed with Marcos's audition that he's recommended him for the National Youth Orchestra Summer Program." The meeting continued with discussions of logistics and opportunities that had seemed impossibly out of reach just weeks before. Throughout it all, Marcos found himself thinking of his grandfather, wishing he could share this moment with him. As they left the office, Eliza hugged her son tightly. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she whispered, echoing his thoughts. "Not just of your playing, but of how you've handled everything with dignity." "I learned that from both of you," Marcos replied. The night of the winter showcase arrived with the school auditorium filled to capacity. Conservatory scouts, donors, parents, and students created a buzz of anticipation. Backstage, Marcos adjusted his new suit, a gift from the music department alumni fund, and carefully tuned his grandfather's violin. Sophia Reynolds approached, elegant in her performance dress. "Nervous?" she asked. "A little," Marcos admitted. "You?" "Terrified," she confessed with a small laugh. "But also excited to play with you instead of competing against you." Ms. Daniels gathered the orchestra for final instructions. "Remember, music is about communication, with each other and with the audience. Listen, breathe, and trust your preparation." As they took their positions on stage, Marcos spotted his mother in the front row, seated between Principal Thompson and the Whitakers. Several rows back, he was surprised to see a familiar face, Valencia Pierce, who had been required to attend as part of her probationary agreement with the school board. The house lights dimmed, and Ms. Daniels raised her baton. As the orchestra began the opening piece, Marcos felt a connection to every musician on stage, a shared language transcending all the barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. When the time came for his solo, Marcos closed his eyes briefly, channeling his grandfather's presence. Then he began to play Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, the same piece that had changed everything weeks earlier, but this time with the full orchestra supporting him. The music soared through the auditorium, each note carrying the legacy of his grandfather, the sacrifices of his mother, and his own journey from exclusion to belonging. When he finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation that seemed to wash away the last remnants of doubt and pain. Looking out at the crowd, at his mother's tear-streaked face, at his fellow musicians' admiration, at the conservatory scout scribbling notes, and even at Valencia's conflicted expression, Marcos understood that his grandfather had been right all along. Music, in its purest form, could speak truths that words often couldn't. And once heard, those truths could never be unheard again. 6 months after the winter showcase, Westridge Academy had undergone significant changes. Valencia Pierce had not returned to her position, instead accepting a private teaching role at a smaller school across town. The disciplinary hearing had resulted in a formal reprimand and mandatory cultural sensitivity training, but no criminal charges, a decision Marcos had supported, believing that systemic change was more important than individual punishment. Ms. Daniels had been permanently appointed as music department head, implementing new blind audition processes for scholarships and performance selections. The Whitakers Foundation had already funded 3 additional students from underrepresented backgrounds, creating a more diverse and vibrant music program. For Marcos, life had transformed in ways he could hardly have imagined. The National Youth Orchestra had accepted him for their summer program. 3 conservatories had already expressed interest in recruiting him after graduation. And his mother had been able to reduce her working hours, using the scholarship funds to pursue her own long-delayed nursing assistant certification. On the final day of the school year, Marcos was called to Principal Thompson's office one last time before summer break. To his surprise, Valencia Pierce was there, along with Ms. Daniels and a local news reporter. "Thank you for coming, Marcos," Thompson greeted him. "Ms. Pierce has something she would like to say to you." Valencia looked different, humbled somehow, the imperious demeanor replaced by something more reflective. "Marcos," she began, her voice softer than he remembered, "I've spent these past months thinking about my actions and their impact. I wanted to apologize to you personally, not just through formal channels." She paused, visibly struggling with her words. "I allowed my biases and preconceptions to blind me to your extraordinary talent. Worse, I actively sought to prevent your success because you didn't fit the image I thought our program needed to project." The reporter was taking notes, this public apology clearly part of Valencia's agreement with the school board. "What I failed to understand," Valencia continued, "is that true excellence in music has nothing to do with appearance or background. Your playing taught me that lesson in the most powerful way possible." Marcos nodded, accepting her words but not quite ready to forgive completely. "Thank you for saying that. The reporter is here," Principal Thompson explained, "because we're announcing a new diversity initiative in our arts programs, partially funded by an anonymous donor who was moved by your story." Ms. Daniels smiled. "The donor stipulated that the program be named after your grandfather, the Samuel Johnson Musical Excellence Initiative." For the first time since entering the room, Marcos felt a surge of emotion. He would have liked that, he said quietly. The initiative would provide instruments, instruction, and opportunities to talented students from underserved communities, creating a pipeline of diversity into programs that had historically excluded them. After the meeting concluded and the formal announcements were made, Valencia asked to speak with Marcos privately for a moment. "There's something else I wanted to tell you," she said when the others had stepped away. "I heard you play at the Regional Youth Symphony concert last month." Marcos raised an eyebrow, surprised. "I went because I needed to hear you again, without my jealousy and prejudice clouding my judgment." Her voice became quieter. "My teacher, the woman who inspired me to become a musician, once told me I had a special gift. But when I heard you play Tchaikovsky that day in my classroom, I realized something I've never admitted to anyone." She met his eyes directly. "You have something I never did, something that can't be taught or practiced into existence. Real artistry. That's why I felt so threatened by you." The admission clearly cost her, but Marcos understood its significance. "Music isn't a competition," he said, repeating his grandfather's words. "It's a conversation between souls." Valencia nodded, a glimmer of genuine respect in her eyes. Your grandfather was a wise man. I wish I could have heard him play. You can, Marcos replied. I have his recordings. Ms. Daniels is creating an archive of his work for the music library. As they parted ways, Marcos didn't feel the vindictive satisfaction he might once have expected. Instead, he felt something more powerful, the sense that real change was possible, even in systems that had resisted it for generations. That afternoon, as summer break officially began, Marcos stood on the steps of Westridge Academy with his violin case in hand. His mother waited in their car, ready to drive him to his first rehearsal with the National Youth Orchestra. Behind him stood the school that had nearly broken his spirit but had instead become the launching pad for his future. He thought about his grandfather, who had faced barriers that never fully yielded in his lifetime. He thought about his mother, who had worked endless hours to give him opportunities she never had. And he thought about his own journey, how pain and prejudice had nearly silenced his music before it could be truly heard. But as Samuel Johnson had always told him, when you play from your heart, Marcos, you don't just make music, you make change. With his grandfather's violin and his own hard-won confidence, Marcos was ready to do exactly that. Dear friend, talent knows no color, class, or background, it only asks for a chance to be heard. In a world where bias still silences too many brilliant voices, it's our responsibility to create spaces where everyone can showcase their gifts. This story reminds us that behind every person stands generations of dreams, some fulfilled and others denied. When we break down barriers for one, we honor the struggles of many who came before. Like, share, and subscribe to support stories that challenge prejudice and celebrate the human spirit's triumph over discrimination. Together, we can ensure no talent remains hidden simply because it doesn't fit someone's narrow expectation of what excellence looks like.